Everything changed while you were in the hospital. This house is no longer yours. You have no place here. Find somewhere else to live." I froze. The wound, still unhealed, throbbed painfully. I couldn't believe those words were coming from the mouth of my only son, the one I had dedicated my entire life to. I had only been hospitalized for 3 weeks due to complications from my hip surgery. I returned with the hope of being reunited with my loved ones, only to find the door shut on the home Anthony and I had built patiently over 30 years. In that instant, I understood the betrayal. It wasn't just about losing my home. It hid a darker plot I couldn't yet grasp. If you've ever wondered what happens when a mother is pushed to her absolute limit, keep reading and tell me in the comments below which city you're reading this from. My hospital discharge papers crinkled in my pocket as the taxi pulled up to my classic-style house. 21 days had felt like an eternity. Complications from my hip surgery had kept me battling fever and infection while the world continued to spin without me. I was exhausted but relieved to finally be home. Home. The 2-story house that Anthony and I had lovingly restored during our 30 years of marriage stood before me, bathed in the late afternoon light. The roses I'd planted decades ago still bloomed by the walkway, though they clearly needed tending after my absence. "Need help with your bags, ma'am?" the driver asked, glancing at my cane. "Just to the door, please," I replied, my voice rough from the dry hospital air. My son should be waiting. The front door opened before we reached it. Richard, my only son, stood in the doorway, but not with the smile I expected. Instead, his face wore an expression I'd never seen: cold, distant, resolute. His voice echoed that same dry, formal tone. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of movement in the living room, his wife Veronica. And were those her parents? "Richard, what's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. He blocked the entrance, not moving aside. "You shouldn't have come. We were expecting you tomorrow." The taxi driver set my small suitcase beside me, sensing the tension. I paid him quickly, suddenly wishing he wouldn't leave. "There's no easy way to say this," Richard continued as the taxi pulled away. "Things changed while you were hospitalized. This house is no longer yours." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with my still recovering body. "What are you talking about? We made arrangements. Veronica's parents needed to move from Dallas, and this house has much more space than you need. The documents are already signed. You'll have to find somewhere else to live." My mind struggled to process his words. Documents? I hadn't signed anything. "Richard, this is absurd. Let me into my house right now." I stepped forward again, leaning heavily on my cane. This time, Veronica appeared beside him. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore what I immediately recognized as my emerald earrings, Anani's gift for our 25th anniversary. "Isabella," she said with that false sweetness I had learned to identify over the years, "we've already packed your personal belongings. They're in boxes in the garage. We can send them wherever you're staying." From behind them, Veronica's parents, Raymond and Claudia Sterling, emerged. Over the years, I'd barely seen them more than a few times. Raymond, tall and elegantly athletic, with silver hair, had always struck me as arrogant. Claudia, with her perpetually judgmental expression, never bothered to hide her disdain for my modest home. The very house she now stood in, as if she owned it. "I'm sorry it came to this," Raymond said, sounding not at all apologetic. But Richard made the arrangements very clear. The house was legally transferred. "Legally?" I managed to stammer. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." Richard's face hardened. "Power of attorney. Remember those papers you signed before your surgery for medical decisions? They also included financial matters." The revelation hit me like a punch. Yes, I had signed a stack of documents handed to me by my own son. While I was anxious about the operation, I trusted him blindly. I hadn't even read past the first page. "You tricked me," I said. The words sounded hollow, insufficient against the magnitude of the betrayal. "We're doing what's best for everyone," Veronica interjected. This house is too much for you to maintain alone. Richard has been managing it for years. Don't show up here again, Richard finished firmly. We'll send your things. The decision is final. I stood there, leaning on my cane, staring at the son I had raised, the boy I'd told bedtime stories to, the teenager I'd taught to drive, the man whose college tuition I'd paid by working extra shifts. Now he was a stranger wearing my son's face. This is illegal, I said softly. And you know it. It's done, he replied coldly. Don't make it harder. Something broke inside me, but not in the way they expected. No tears, no please. It was a freezing clarity, a determination I hadn't felt since my years overseeing bank compliance. Enjoy it then, I said simply, turning away. Enjoy everything. The confusion on their faces at my calmness almost made the devastation worth it. Almost. As I limped toward the taxi, I'd had the foresight to ask it to wait. I pulled out my phone, not to call the police. Not yet. That would come later, in my own time, in my own way. Instead, I sent a single message to Gloria Evans. Plan B. The hotel room in downtown Phoenix was impersonal but clean. A temporary refuge while I regained my strength and clarity. My hands still trembled as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Gloria replied immediately, "Stay safe. I'm on my way." Gloria Evans and I had been friends for 40 years, ever since college. She had become a formidable lawyer, while I had built my career in bank compliance. After Anani's death, she'd helped me organize my affairs with a meticulousness born of our shared professional paranoia. Always have a backup plan, she'd advised, especially when it came to family money. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Now, her foresight seemed almost prophetic. A soft knock on the door announced her arrival. Despite the late hour, Gloria looked impeccable in her tailored suit, her silver hair pulled back in her characteristic bun. Her expression, however, was pure fury. "Those miserable vultures," she whispered with rage as she hugged me carefully, mindful of my still recovering body. "Are you all right? Physically or emotionally?" I attempted a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Both." She placed her briefcase on the desk and began pulling out files with practiced efficiency. "I'm standing, which is something." "The rest," I said, falling back onto the bed. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and all of this will be a nightmare caused by a fever." Gloria's expression softened for a moment before she regained her professional mask. "I've already started the process. The trust documentation is solid. Anthony was meticulous. The house transfer won't withstand legal scrutiny." "How long?" I asked. "To invalidate this fraudulent transfer? A few weeks, maybe months if they decide to play dirty." She paused. "But Isabella, there's something else. Something I found while reviewing your accounts." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "Unusual withdrawals from your investment accounts during your hospitalization. Large withdrawals." She handed me a printed statement. I scanned it quickly. My banking experience immediately detected the irregularities. 5 transfers totaling over $220,000. All to accounts I didn't recognize. All made with digital signatures purportedly from me. While I was barely conscious in the ICU, I whispered, feeling the full weight of the betrayal. "They didn't just take my house. They've been draining my accounts." "There's something worse," Gloria continued gravely. "My legal assistant did a preliminary check on the Sterlings. Their real estate consulting business in Dallas has several complaints that were mysteriously withdrawn before formal investigations began. And Veronica's LinkedIn profile shows experience at 3 mortgage companies that ended up closing due to regulatory violations." Everything clicked with chilling clarity. Are they involved in some kind of mortgage fraud? Gloria nodded. "And they've likely been planning it for months, waiting for the right moment. Your hospitalization gave them the perfect opportunity to accelerate their plans." My mind raced back to conversations from the past year. Veronica's growing interest in my finances, Richard's seemingly casual questions about my bank accounts and contacts. The foundation of this betrayal had been built long before my surgery. Richard, I said, his name catching in my throat. Do you think he knows what they're doing? Gloria's silence was answer enough. I taught him better than that, I murmured, barely audible. His father taught him better too, Gloria replied, her tone soft but firm. People change, Isabella, especially when money is involved. The question now is, what do you want to do about it? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 67 years dedicated to building a career, a family, a home. When I opened them, something inside me had hardened. Everything, I answered. I want to do everything possible to reclaim what's mine and make them face the consequences. Everyone, even Richard. Gloria's eyebrow barely arched. No maternal protection clause, I said. He made his choice. Saying it hurt, but it was true. If he's involved in something illegal, he deserves what's coming. She nodded, satisfied with my determination. Then we'll have to be smart, strategic. I have contacts in the FBI Financial Crimes Unit who would be very interested in what we've uncovered. I have some contacts too, I replied, thinking of former colleagues. But I don't want to move too quickly. They think I'm defeated. A helpless old woman who will quietly retreat. That perception gives us an advantage. What are you thinking? I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black notebook, my lifeline during my banking years. First, we document everything. Every withdrawal, every forged document, every lie told. Then we follow the money trail. If they're setting up a fraud, there will be patterns. Gloria smiled, that sharp, predatory smile I remembered from our youth. And then, I said, feeling a cold determination course through me. We spring the trap when they least expect it. We began to outline the plan. My phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Mom, we need the passwords to your investment accounts to transfer the remaining funds for your care. Send them as soon as possible. I showed the message to Gloria, who shook her head in disgust. What do I say? I asked. Nothing yet, she replied. Let them wonder. Let them worry. I nodded, setting the phone aside. The old Isabella would have responded instantly, eager to calm the waters, to maintain peace at any cost. But that Isabella had been left behind at the door of the house they stole from me. This Isabella was playing the long game, holed up in a hotel room. I reconnected with my best friend and lawyer, Gloria, who revealed shocking news. Not only had they seized my house, but they were also draining my accounts while I was hospitalized. Upon discovering suspicious movements in the Sterling's business history, I had to confront the heartbreaking possibility that my own son was involved in something truly sinister. Still recovering physically but firmer in my resolve, I made a key decision. Instead of confronting them immediately, I would let them believe they had won while I silently built the case that would be their undoing. You have to see this, Gloria said, sliding her laptop across the hotel desk. 3 days had passed since my humiliating eviction. We had moved to a more comfortable extended stay suite, paying cash to leave no electronic traces. My physical strength was slowly returning, though the emotional wounds remained raw. The screen displayed property records from my neighborhood. I squinted, reviewing the document. The third property from the bottom, Gloria indicated. My eyes widened in shock. The Miller family, 2 houses down, had sold their home 3 months ago. The buyers, Sterling Investment Properties, LLC. That can't be a coincidence, I murmured. Even better, Gloria said, flipping through more documents. The Henderson family across the street had sold to the same company last month, and the retired couple on the corner already had their house under contract with that same buyer. They're buying up the whole neighborhood, I whispered, watching the scheme take shape. But why? Gloria opened a zoning request filed with the City Planning Department 2 weeks ago while I was still in the hospital. They submitted this proposal to change the zoning for the entire block from single-family residential to mixed-use commercial. The news hit me like a punch. My neighborhood was right on the edge of downtown Phoenix's rapidly expanding district. With the new zoning, property values would skyrocket. They're using my house as headquarters while they buy up the other homes around it, I said, suddenly understanding how all the pieces fit together. As soon as they control enough of the block, they can force the change and values will at least triple. Gloria finished. With current market prices, we're talking about a potential profit of between $15 and $20 million. My banking experience immediately grasped the magnitude of the plan, but they needed enormous initial capital to start buying. Where would they get it from? Gloria's expression darkened. That's where it gets concerning. I asked an investigator friend to check some records. The Sterlings have a history in Dallas. They identify vulnerable homeowners, mostly seniors or those with financial troubles, and use predatory loans to seize their properties. Mortgage fraud, I said, remembering the term well from my years at the bank. Exactly. They offer refinancing that's too good to be true. They manipulate appraisals with false reports and structure the loans in such a way that they inevitably fail. When the owners can't pay, they swoop in and buy the properties for a fraction of their worth. I thought of my neighbors, many of them elderly, living on fixed incomes in homes they'd owned for decades, perfect victims. And my accounts, the money they've been transferring is surely the initial capital. They needed funds for the first purchases and to cover expenses until the plan paid off. My investment portfolio was the most convenient source. The calculated cruelty of it all took my breath away. It wasn't just about my home and my money. It was about using it to destroy my entire community. People who had been at Anani's funeral, who had brought me food when I became a widow. And Richard? I asked, finally voicing the doubt that had haunted me. How involved is he? Gloria hesitated before opening another folder. This was recorded 3 weeks ago at the Dallas First National Bank. The security video showed Richard and Veronica entering the bank together and meeting with a loan officer. The timestamp showed it was 2 days after your surgery, while you were still heavily sedated in the ICU. I realized they had used the power of attorney to open my safe deposit box. I understood this when I recognized the bank where I kept my important documents. Yes, and according to the access log, Gloria confirmed, they removed several items, including the original deed to your property and the trust papers. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed for a moment. My own son, the boy who once demanded absolute fairness when playing board games, who had returned a wallet with $50 inside. How could he have become this person? There's something else you should see, Gloria said softly, showing me a chain of emails. My contacts at the SEC sent these to me. The Sterlings have been on their radar for a while. The emails were between Veronica and her father, dated almost 8 months ago. They discussed their plans in thinly veiled language, pointing out properties in my neighborhood, evaluating which owners could be prey to their deceptions. And most disturbing, they mentioned my house as their operation center once they gained control of it. One particular phrase chilled my blood. Still hesitant but yielding. It says, "Mother, unlikely to fully recover from scheduled surgery. Accelerated timeline." Scheduled surgery? I repeated almost a whisper. My hip replacement wasn't an emergency. It had been scheduled months in advance. Isabella. Gloria's voice sounded like a warning, as if preparing me for a blow. They were waiting for this. They knew I would be vulnerable after surgery. I continued, the horrible truth dawning on me. They were counting on it. We don't know if Richard understood the full extent, Gloria started. Enough. I raised my hand, unable to accept any more excuses for my son. He knew enough. He knew they wanted my house, my money. He knew they were planning something while I was incapacitated. The pain of that certainty was sharper than any surgical blade. My own son had not only betrayed me but had done so with calculation and coldness. I stood, ignoring the protest from my recovering hip, and walked to the window. The Phoenix skyline gleamed under the sunset, indifferent to my human tragedy unfolding in its streets. "What do you want to do?" Gloria asked softly. I turned to her, my decision crystal clear. "I want justice," I replied simply. Not just for myself, but for everyone, for those they've cheated or plan to cheat, and I want my house back. Gloria nodded, serious but firm. Then we'll have to move cautiously. They think they've already won. That gives us the element of surprise. Good, I replied. A plan was already forming in my head because I was about to give them the surprise of their lives. As I reviewed the property records with Gloria, a disturbing pattern emerged. The Sterlings had been systematically buying homes throughout my neighborhood, preparing an ambitious rezoning plan worth millions. The betrayal hurt even more when I discovered evidence that Richard wasn't just an opportunist. He had known about the plans for months. He might even have calculated the takeover to coincide precisely with my surgery. With my community and my longtime neighbors endangered by their predatory scheme, my resolve hardened. It was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about stopping a sophisticated fraud operation before more vulnerable people fell victim. And I was precisely the person who knew how to do it. Isabella, are you sure about this? Gloria asked with concern, watching me apply makeup in the hotel bathroom mirror. Your hip is still healing. I spent 21 days in that hospital bed feeling helpless, I replied, applying lipstick with a steady hand. I'm done with helplessness. A week had passed since my eviction. In that time, Gloria and I had meticulously reconstructed how the Sterlings' operation worked. Their business in Dallas had left a trail of financial victims. Seniors who lost everything through predatory contracts and forged documents. Now they were replicating the same scheme in Phoenix, using my house as their base. The timing has to be perfect, I reminded her, giving myself a final look in the mirror. My elegant gray pantsuit and discreet jewelry projected exactly the image I wanted. Not a defeated old woman, but a banking professional with decades of experience. The agents are quiet, Gloria confirmed. They're ready. They'll only act when we give the signal. After discovering the magnitude of the scam, we had taken our evidence to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. The agents had been building a case against the Sterlings for months, but they lacked the internal access we could now offer. We struck a deal. They would postpone immediate arrests to let us gather more solid evidence. And in return, I would have priority in recovering my assets. Remember, we need documented proof that they're using my identity and my financial information. I recited the key points of our strategy: bank access, forged signatures, explicit recognition of the plan. Without those documents, they could claim I voluntarily surrendered everything. Gloria nodded as she checked her watch. Veronica's weekly salon appointment starts in 30 minutes. She'll be out for at least 2 hours. Raymond and Claudia are at a real estate viewing across town. And Richard, according to his calendar, won't be back from work until 5 o'clock. Perfect. My son's predictable routine, which I once found endearing, was now my strategic advantage. I took a deep breath to steady myself. Let's go. The taxi dropped me 2 blocks from my house. I walked slowly, using the cane more as a facade of fragility than for actual support. The neighborhood looked the same as always, with well-tended gardens, old homes, and the grand oak on the corner where Richard had built a treehouse. Yet everything felt different to me, stained by the certainty of what was secretly happening. As I approached the house, I noticed subtle changes. The roses I'd cared for so many years were gone, replaced by generic plants. The porch furniture Anthony and I had restored was no longer there. The transformation had begun, erasing the traces of our family. I didn't go to the front door. I preferred to circle around to the side entrance, the one leading to the kitchen, which in my haste to get to the hospital, I had forgotten to lock. For years, it had been our secret. Richard, as a teenager, used it to sneak in after curfew, thinking I didn't know. The key turned easily in the lock. I entered silently, just catching the sound of unfamiliar voices coming from my study. Following the sound, I stopped in front of the half-open door. The closing with the Miller family is scheduled for Friday, a masculine voice said, which I recognized as Raymond Sterling's. Once that's done, we'll control 40% of the block. And the Henderson property? Another unfamiliar voice asked, likely a partner. That's already resolved. We used Mrs. Hayes's banking credentials to secure the financing. Clean as a whistle. My hand gripped my cane tightly. They were using my name and my banking reputation to orchestrate their frauds. Exactly what we needed to prove. I activated the recorder on my phone before pushing the door open. The scene froze like a painting. Raymond Sterling, seated behind a Nani's antique desk, his partner standing by the window, all staring at me with naked astonishment. "Hello, Raymond," I said calmly, discussing business in my study. "Isabella," he reacted immediately, standing up. "This is unexpected. How did you get in?" "Through the door," I replied directly. "The same door to the house that still belongs to me legally." His partner, a nervous man in his 30s, looked at us uneasily. "Do you want me to come back later, Mr. Sterling?" "No need," I answered before Raymond could open his mouth. "I just came to pick up some personal papers I need." Raymond's expression hardened. "This property is no longer yours. Richard was very clear about that." "Yes, he was," I nodded, walking toward the filing cabinet in the corner. "Very clear about his intentions. Just as clear as you are using my banking credentials for your financing operations." "Operations?" Color drained from Raymond's face. "I don't know what you're talking about, do I?" I opened the cabinet drawer and pulled out a folder. "The Henderson property, using my data to secure funds. I just heard you discussing it." The partner began backing toward the exit. "Mr. Sterling, I think I'd better go," he said. "Isabella is confused," Raymond said brusquely. "Her recent hospitalization affected her mental state, didn't it, Isabella?" I smiled coldly as I closed the drawer. "My mind is perfectly clear. Clear enough to understand what you, Claudia, and Veronica are plotting. Clear enough to wonder if my son truly understands the legal consequences of the fraud he's facilitating." Raymond's face changed, the mask of concern dissolving to reveal pure, calculated menace. "You have no proof of anything, and even if you did, no one would believe you over your own son. Now get out before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I nodded as if evaluating his words. "You're right about one thing, Raymond. Proof is essential." I raised my phone, clearly displaying the recording app. "That's why I made sure to get it." His eyes widened with fury, erasing any surprise. "Give me that phone." "I don't think so." I backed toward the door, my heart pounding, though I outwardly appeared calm. "I have what I came for. Enjoy the house while you can." As I turned to leave, Raymond lunged, gripping my arm with bruising force. "You're not leaving with that recording." I hadn't anticipated a physical confrontation. A sharp pain shot through my still recovering hip as I struggled to stay upright. "Let go of me," I demanded, raising my voice intentionally. "Give me the phone first," he growled, trying to snatch it with his other hand. At that instant, the front door burst open. "FBI, hands where we can see them." Agents Rips and Callahan stormed in, weapons drawn. Raymond froze, then slowly released my arm, raising his hands. Our contingency plan, activated by the panic button app on my phone, had worked perfectly. Underscore 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 Isabella Hayes. Agent Rips approached as her partner secured Raymond. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I replied, leaning against the door frame. "And I think I have something you'll find very interesting." Taking a calculated risk, I had returned to my house, taking advantage of Veronica's absence, and entering through a forgotten side door to surprise Raymond Sterling in the middle of discussing his frauds. When confronted, his initial surprise transformed into a menacing attitude, forcing our FBI contacts to intervene earlier than planned. Although the confrontation turned physical, I managed to secure the proof we needed. A recording where Raymond explicitly admitted to using my banking credentials in his scheme. As he was led away in handcuffs, I understood that this was just the beginning of dismantling their entire operation. The real test would come when my son discovered what was happening, and that his mother was responsible for the Sterling's downfall. Underscore 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 underscore. The FBI office was impersonally cold, beige walls, functional furniture, a faint smell of coffee and paper. I waited in an interview room, my hip aching despite the extra-strength painkiller Agent Rips had offered me. Mrs. Hayes, Agent Callahan commented, closing his notebook. Your recording is incredibly valuable. Combined with the financial documentation you and Ms. Evans provided, we have enough to secure search warrants for all of the Sterling's properties and records. And what about my house? And my accounts? I asked. A judge has already issued an emergency order freezing any transactions related to your property, he assured me. No one can sell or transfer it until legal ownership is clarified. I felt a deep sense of relief, though I knew this was just the beginning. The Sterlings were in custody, but Richard and Veronica still knew nothing of what had happened. What happens now? I wanted to know. We'll execute search warrants at their residence tonight, Rips explained. Mrs. Sterling will be taken in for questioning. As for your son, the agent hesitated, softening her professional tone slightly. Based on your statements, we'll have to determine the level of involvement he may have had. The door opened, and Gloria entered, her face serious but satisfied. The first court orders had just arrived. They were simultaneously moving on the Sterling's offices in Dallas. Mrs. Hayes, Callahan said cautiously, we understand this is complicated. If you'd prefer not to be present when we execute the warrant at your house. I'll be there, I interrupted firmly. This is my home. I want to see this through to the end. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 hours later, I was in an unmarked FBI vehicle parked across from my house. The evening light was fading, lengthening shadows across the lawn where Richard once played as a child. Veronica's car was in the driveway. She had returned from her salon appointment, completely unaware that her father was being processed at the Federal Detention Center. In position, Rips murmured from the driver's seat, listening to updates through her earpiece. Mrs. Sterling Hayes confirmed inside along with her daughter. They arrived earlier than expected. My heart tightened. Richard wasn't supposed to be home yet. I had hoped to spare him the public spectacle of what was about to happen. I had even arranged for him to be approached separately at his office. Now he would experience the full force of the raid alongside his wife. Are you sure you want to witness this? Gloria asked beside me, covering my hand with hers. Before I could answer, a convoy of vehicles appeared down the street. 3 unmarked sedans and a tactical van. They pulled up in front of my house and agents disembarked with synchronized movements, some wearing the characteristic FBI jackets. Federal agents, we have a warrant. The words resonated clearly in the quiet neighborhood as they approached the front door. I didn't hear the response from inside, but the door opened. A moment later, from my angle, I could see Veronica in the doorway, her face shifting from confusion to shock. Behind her, Richard appeared, positioning himself protectively beside his wife. It's time, Rips said, opening her door. Please stay behind us. As we crossed the street, neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. I felt their curious, concerned gazes, some perhaps relishing the unfolding drama. Veronica was the first to see me approaching behind the agents. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. You, she spat, her voice rising hysterically. You did this. Richard's eyes locked onto mine, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he understood that I was with the federal agents, not being questioned like them. Mom. His voice cracked slightly. What's going on? Your mother has provided evidence of a large-scale financial fraud committed by the Sterling family, Agent Callahan stated formally. We have a warrant to search these premises and confiscate all relevant documents and electronic devices. Fraud? Richard repeated, looking genuinely confused. What fraud? This is absurd. It is, I said, advancing, my cane tapping a rhythm against the ground. Raymond was very clear this morning about using my banking credentials to secure fraudulent financing in my study in my house. Veronica's face drained of all color. You were here? How did you do it? The side door, I replied simply. There are some things about this house you never bothered to learn, Veronica. Like the fact that it legally belongs to a trust created by my late husband, which cannot be transferred without the signature of all trustees, including Gloria, who certainly never signed anything. Richard looked at me and his wife, growing increasingly desperate. Mom, it's been a misunderstanding. We wanted to help you by stealing my house, draining my accounts, setting up your in-laws in a property scheme, using my financial reputation. My voice remained firm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. That's not helping, Richard. That's fraud. That's theft. Mrs. Sterling Hayes, we need you to come with us for questioning, Rips interjected, gesturing toward one of the vehicles. Veronica's surprise gave way to a calculated calm. I want my lawyer present. I won't say anything without representation. That's your right, Callahan acknowledged before turning to Richard. Mr. Thompson will also need to speak with you. I don't understand, Richard said, his voice hollow. Mom, what have you done? The question, so backward, so revealing of his inability to recognize his own culpability, hit me like a punch. What have I done? I repeated, staring at him. I've protected myself and others from people who believe they can take whatever they want without consequences. I taught you better than this, Richard. Your father taught you better. As agents led Veronica toward a waiting vehicle, she turned with unexpected venom. You think you've won? You have no idea what will happen when my father's lawyers get involved. Your father is already in custody, I interrupted calmly. And your mother, too. The FBI is currently searching your offices in Dallas. It's over, Veronica. Her face twisted with fury as agents firmly guided her into the car. Richard remained on the porch, watching in disbelief as other agents entered our house, carrying equipment to collect evidence. Mom, he murmured as I turned to follow Gloria back to our vehicle. I didn't know everything they were planning. You have to believe me. I paused, observing the face of the son I had raised, searching for truth in his eyes. Perhaps you didn't know everything, I conceded. But you knew enough, Richard, and still you chose them instead of me. As I walked away, I heard his broken voice behind me. Where am I supposed to go now? I didn't look back. That question echoed the very one I had faced when he threw me out of my own home. The symmetry was not lost on me, but unlike my son, I found no satisfaction in his anguish, only a profound sadness for what we had both lost. Some betrayals, I was learning, leave wounds too deep for simple forgiveness. Underscore 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 underscore. As FBI agents searched my house, arrested Veronica, and questioned Richard, I watched from across the street, torn between vindication and pain. The confusion on my son's face when he realized I had orchestrated his downfall soon transformed into desperate denial, claiming ignorance of the plan. Veronica's mask of composure finally broke, revealing the calculating criminal she had always been, while another part of me recoiled at Richard's pleading question. Where am I supposed to go now? I recognized the poetic justice. He was experiencing exactly what he had put me through. Some lessons come at a terrible cost, but as I walked away from the house I would soon reclaim, I knew this confrontation was only the first step on a longer path toward justice and perhaps one day healing. Underscore 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 underscore. You should eat something, Isabella. Gloria pushed a container of soup toward me on the hotel desk we'd converted into a makeshift office. 3 days had passed since the FBI operation. 3 days of statements, evidence review, and legal hearings, leaving me almost no space to process everything that had happened. I'm not hungry, I replied, reviewing the latest packet of documents Gloria had brought from her office. You haven't been hungry in days, she insisted. Your body is still recovering. You need strength. I sighed, knowing she was right. The physical toll and tension had caught up with me. Reluctantly, I opened the container and tried a spoonful of the chicken soup. Better. Gloria nodded, satisfied. Now we should discuss tomorrow's meeting. The meeting she referred to would be my first face-to-face encounter with Richard since the operation. He had requested it through his lawyer, a young public defender named Marcus Reed, who had contacted Gloria the day before. He says he didn't understand the extent of the Sterling's operation. Gloria continued in a neutral tone. He claims Veronica kept him in the dark about almost everything, and that the power of attorney he tricked you into signing allowed him to transfer funds from your accounts. I couldn't help the bitterness that crept into my voice. He was in the dark about those two as well. Gloria's expression softened. I'm not defending him, Isabella. I'm just relaying what his lawyer said. I set my spoon down on the plate, no longer wanting to eat. What else did this Reed say? Richard wants to cooperate fully with the investigation. He's offered to give detailed testimony about Veronica and her parents in exchange for his situation being considered in his own process. He's betraying them. The idea shouldn't have surprised me, and yet it did. The Richard I knew had always been fiercely loyal. Survival instinct, Gloria suggested. The evidence against the Sterlings is overwhelming. He's making the most convenient legal decision. And what does he want from me? I asked, though I already suspected. Officially nothing. The meeting is supposedly just for him to give you his version of events. Gloria's skeptical tone made it clear she didn't believe that was the whole truth. Unofficially, my impression is that he hopes you'll speak to the prosecutors on his behalf. A mother's plea for leniency could carry a lot of weight. I closed my eyes, exhausted to my core. The thought of facing Richard, of listening to his justifications and excuses, squeezed my chest with pain. You don't have to meet him, Gloria reminded me softly. At this point, you owe him nothing. I know, I said. But I need answers, Gloria. I need to understand how my son could become someone capable of doing this. Underscore 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 underscore. The interview room in the federal building was cold and stark. A metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a large mirror that undoubtedly concealed an observation room. I sat with Gloria beside me, my hands clasped on the table to hide their slight tremor. When the door opened, I barely recognized the man who entered. Richard, my son, always self-assured and well-groomed, looked disheveled. His usual suit had been replaced by wrinkled khaki pants and a simple shirt. The shadow of stubble on his face revealed he hadn't shaved in days. Mom, he said as he took a seat across from me. His lawyer, a serious young man with wire-rimmed glasses, sat beside him. Richard, I greeted, trying to keep my voice steady. A tense silence stretched between us. Neither of us knew how to begin this impossible conversation. Mrs. Hayes, Marcus Reed finally spoke. My client requested this meeting to clarify certain aspects of the situation that he believes have been misunderstood. I'm listening, I replied, my gaze fixed on Richard, not his lawyer. Richard cleared his throat. First, I want you to know I never wanted things to go this far. When Veronica and I talked about her parents moving to Phoenix, it was meant to be temporary, just until they found their own place. And the power of attorney, I interrupted him. The one you tricked me into signing before my surgery. He lowered his gaze in shame. That was Veronica's idea. She said it was just a precaution in case decisions needed to be made while you recovered. Yet you used it to transfer my house and empty my accounts, I accused. He hesitated, glancing at his lawyer, who barely nodded. That was all Veronica and Raymond. They said they were moving some funds to safer investments for your retirement. I didn't know they were actually stealing. I watched his face, searching for the truth in his eyes. There was desperation, no doubt fear. But was it genuine remorse or just regret at being caught? The house, I insisted. You yourself told me I couldn't come back. You stood at the door of the home your father and I built, and told me it was no longer mine. His eyes fixed on the table. Veronica convinced me it was for the best. She told me the house was too much for you, that you'd be happier in a senior living community. He swallowed hard. I thought we were helping you, he added, referring to kicking me out with only the clothes on my back and leaving my personal belongings in boxes in the garage. The calm I had maintained began to crack. That's not helping, Richard. That's cruelty. I know, he murmured. Now I know. What did they have against you? I blurted out. It was the question that had tormented me for days. Veronica and her parents. What power did they have over you that you would betray your own mother like this? Richard suddenly lifted his head, surprised. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Hayes, Marcus Reed interjected, we should focus on. No, Richard interrupted. She deserves to know. He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I made some bad investments. I lost a lot of money, our savings, part of our retirement fund. I was desperate to get it back before Veronica found out. Raymond offered to help. He said he had secure investment opportunities. He lent you money? I guessed. Richard nodded, his expression dejected at first. Yes. Then it became more complicated. I signed papers. I got involved in their businesses without really understanding what they were about. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already caught up in several of their frauds. They had leverage over you, Gloria observed. They had me in their hands, Richard corrected bitterly. Veronica made it clear that if I didn't cooperate with their plans, her father would make sure I took all the blame. I tried to process this new information, attempting to reconcile it with the son I thought I knew. And my house, my accounts, a test of loyalty, he admitted, shrugging his shoulders in shame. To show I was committed to the operation. Veronica said that once the neighborhood land was rezoned, we'd make enough money so I could comfortably place you somewhere else. Did you actually believe that? I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. I wanted to believe it, he replied softly. It was easier than accepting what I was really doing. The brutal sincerity of those words hit me for the first time since this nightmare began. I glimpsed the son I remembered, the boy who, when caught lying, would eventually admit the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Richard, I said carefully, what exactly are you asking of me today? For the first time he held my gaze. Nothing, Mom. I don't deserve your help or your forgiveness. I just... His voice cracked slightly. I needed you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was weak and I was scared. I made terrible decisions. Whatever happens now, I'll accept it. The simplicity and dignity of his answer, so different from the desperate excuses I had imagined, disarmed me. Before I could respond, a knock on the door interrupted us. Agent Rips entered, nodding apologetically. Sorry to interrupt, but we have an urgent matter. Mrs. Hayes, could you step out for a moment? Underscore 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 underscore. In a cold, aseptic federal building interview room, I finally faced my son, seeking answers to the betrayal that tore our family apart. Instead of the excuses I expected, Richard revealed a more complex truth. He had become entangled with the Sterling's business years ago out of economic desperation, becoming their pawn through blackmail and manipulation. Although his explanation didn't justify what he had done, admitting that the transfer of the house was a test of loyalty designed by Veronica offered me the first glimpse of the son I thought I knew. Just as that painful revelation began to change my understanding of things, Agent Rips burst in with urgent news, hinting at a new turn in an increasingly tangled case. Despite everything, I found myself wondering if perhaps there was a way forward amidst this devastation. Not back to what was, but towards something different built on painful truth, not comfortable illusions. Underscore 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 underscore. Agent Rips led me to a small conference room down the hall. Gloria followed closely, her normally steady demeanor somewhat altered, which immediately put me on alert. What's happened? I asked as the door closed behind us. We've been executing new search warrants tied to the Sterling's files, Rips explained, placing a folder on the table. A team in Dallas found something you need to see. She opened the folder and pulled out several photographs, carefully arranging them in front of me. I leaned in, observing the overwhelming images with growing bewilderment. They showed a private hospital room, medical equipment, and a patient in a bed. I don't understand, I said, looking up. What does this have to do with? The words caught in my throat as I focused on the last photo. The patient was you, unconscious, connected to monitors in the ICU during your recent hospitalization. These were found in a hidden safe in Raymond Sterling's Dallas office, Rips explained quietly. Next to them, she placed another set of documents on the table. My medical records, doctor's notes, medication orders, and my own clinical charts, which should have been under strict protection at Phoenix General Hospital. How did they get these? Gloria asked, her lawyer's instinct immediately grasping the implications. That's what concerns us, Rips replied. The timestamps on these photos don't match regular visiting hours, and these documents contain information that family members wouldn't normally have access to. A shiver ran through me as I understood what she was implying. Someone inside the hospital was collaborating with them. Rips nodded grimly. We've identified a nurse who accessed your records on several occasions when neither Richard nor Veronica were present. Phone records show multiple calls between this person and Raymond Sterling. But why? I asked, trying to understand why they would monitor me so closely. Gloria's face had turned pale as she examined the documents. Isabella, look at these medication notes. I followed her finger to a note on one of the charts. A dosage adjustment in my post-surgical pain management. The original prescription had been crossed out and replaced with a higher dose written in different handwriting. Your recovery took longer than expected, Rips explained carefully. The infection that kept you hospitalized for 21 days instead of the usual 5 to 7. We're investigating if it might have been deliberately caused. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying they tried to? I couldn't finish the sentence. We're not making any accusations yet, Rips clarified immediately. But we are investigating the possibility that someone may have deliberately attempted to prolong your hospitalization to give the Sterlings more time to execute their plans. I gripped the edge of the table, suddenly dizzy. The idea that someone had manipulated my medical treatment, risking my life, was almost impossible to comprehend. Does Richard know about this? I managed to ask. Not yet, she replied. We wanted to inform you first due to the very personal nature of this discovery. Gloria placed her hand over mine, her expression grave. Isabella, if someone intentionally altered your care, this case escalates significantly. We're no longer just talking about fraud and elder abuse, but possibly attempted. I know, I interrupted, unable to hear those words spoken aloud. The possibility was too monstrous to confront directly. There's something else, Rips continued with visible discomfort. We found a life insurance policy in your name, taken out 6 months ago. The beneficiary is listed as Richard Thompson. I felt the room tilt. Richard knew, I whispered, the last fragments of hope for my son crumbling. He had to know. Not necessarily, Rips warned. The application bears his signature, but we've already identified several forged documents in this case. We need to investigate further before drawing conclusions. I closed my eyes, trying to resist this new wave of betrayal. If Richard was aware of these maneuvers, if he had been complicit in a threat against my life, then everything he told me in the interview room was a lie. That image of my true son, which I thought I had seen, was nothing more than another manipulation. I need to see him again, I said, opening my eyes with renewed resolve. Right now, Mrs. Hayes, with this new information, we advise you not to, Rips began. I need to see his face when he hears this, I insisted. That's how I'll know if he knew. After 21 years as a compliance officer and a lifetime as a mother, I had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect lies. I had to look Richard in the eyes when this bomb dropped. Rips hesitated, then nodded. We were going to question him about these findings anyway. If you insist on being present, we can arrange it. When we returned to the room, Richard and his lawyer were speaking in hushed tones. His lawyer leaned forward, immediately on alert. Agent Rips, my client has cooperated fully. If you're implying he participated in any kind of... I'm not implying anything yet, Rips interrupted. I'm asking for an explanation of these documents. I can't explain it because I had nothing to do with it. Richard's voice rose in panic. Veronica handled all our insurance matters. She said we were updating our policies. I signed whatever she put in front of me. The raw fear in his eyes, not just fear of consequences, but true horror at what had been done, revealed more than any words. My son had been weak, naive, and morally fragile. But I didn't believe he had consciously participated in a plan that could have endangered my life. Do you realize what this means, Richard? I asked quietly. Your wife and her parents might have been planning something far worse than just stealing my house. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders beginning to tremble. Oh God, he whispered. What have I done? What have I allowed to happen? Seeing my son confront the magnitude of his wife's betrayal, I felt an unexpected wave of compassion. Richard had made terrible decisions. He had betrayed me in ways that seemed unforgivable. But he was also a victim of the Sterling's manipulation, another piece in a game far darker than he himself understood. I need to amend my statement, he suddenly said, looking up with new determination. I need to tell you everything I know about Veronica and her parents. Underscore 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 everything. A devastating revelation shattered what little remained of my world. There was evidence suggesting the Sterlings deliberately complicated my medical recovery, possibly even endangering my life. Most shocking of all was the discovery of a life insurance policy on me with Richard as the beneficiary. When confronted with this evidence, my son's genuine horror and shock told me what I desperately needed to know. Although he had betrayed me terribly, he was not implicated in this monstrous aspect of the plan. While Richard faced the true nature of his wife's actions, His determination to reveal everything hinted that even darker secrets remained to be uncovered. Despite my persistent anger, I found myself thinking that perhaps amidst this nightmare, the first fragile seeds of redemption might be born. Not forgiveness yet, but perhaps understanding. Underscore 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 17 properties. Agent Callahan spread a map across the conference room table. All acquired through the same fraudulent methods, all channeled through shell companies linked to the Sterlings. 2 weeks had passed since the explosive revelations about my medical records. I had been moved to a safe apartment provided by the FBI. Only Gloria and the agents directly assigned to the case knew my whereabouts. The investigation had grown impressively, uncovering a criminal network far wider than initially thought. And the nurse? I asked. The question that had haunted me since I learned someone might have deliberately complicated my recovery. Miranda Jenkins, Rips replied, pushing a personnel file toward me. She worked in post-surgical care for 3 years. We've confirmed she received several payments from a Sterling shell company totaling over $25,000 in the last 6 months. She has admitted to manipulating your medication. I needed to know the whole truth, however painful. Callahan and Rips exchanged glances. She's cooperating, Callahan said cautiously. According to her statement, she was ordered to prolong your recovery period by adjusting certain medications and introducing a mild bacterial contamination during 4 changes. My stomach churned at the coldness of that clinical explanation, which in reality meant calculated harm. She could have killed me. She claims she calibrated the contamination to cause prolonged hospitalization without risking your life, Rips added, her tone loaded with repulsion, as if that would soften what she had done. And Veronica, she orchestrated all this? The question almost sounded rhetorical. I already knew the answer. Raymond Sterling made the initial contact with Jenkins, Callahan confirmed. But evidence indicates Veronica designed the details. Text messages recovered from her phone include precise questions about your treatment schedule, medication regimen, and anticipated discharge dates. I closed my eyes for a moment, still trying to assimilate the calculated cruelty of it all. My own daughter-in-law had deliberately prolonged my suffering to buy time for their scheme. And what about Richard's involvement? Gloria asked, voicing what I couldn't. We found no evidence that he knew about the medical manipulation, Rips said. His cooperation has been extensive, and we believe it's genuine. The prosecution considers his testimony crucial to sustaining the case against the Sterlings. At least a small relief. My son had betrayed me, but he hadn't conspired to physically harm me. The difference was significant, though it didn't erase the pain of his actions. Is there anything else I should see? Callahan asked, sliding another folder toward me. This was recovered from Veronica's private email. Inside was a series of messages between Veronica and her parents dating back almost 2 years. They had meticulously designed a plan to seize my assets, starting by isolating me from family and friends, then gradually appropriating my financial affairs, and finally relocating me to a long-term care facility, once they had everything under legal control. That coldness made my hands tremble as I read. They had targeted me long before my hip surgery was necessary, seeing my physical decline as an opportunity to exploit. My hospitalization only accelerated their timeline. And this, Callahan continued, is perhaps the most disturbing. He placed before me a printed advertisement for a luxury retirement community in Arizona. It was accompanied by an email from Veronica to her parents. Perfect location for Isabella once everything is finalized, isolated, minimal supervision, and the memory unit admits patients without too much medical documentation. Once she's there, we'll have absolute control over all visits and communications. They plan to institutionalize me, effectively imprison me in a place far from anyone who knew me. where I would be easily forgotten while they enjoyed their stolen gains. There will be additional charges based on this evidence, Rips explained. Elder abuse, conspiracy, and possibly attempted homicide, depending on how the prosecutor interprets the medical manipulation. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak immediately. The magnitude of what they had planned, the calculated destruction not only of my financial security, but also my freedom and dignity, was almost impossible to assimilate. When can I go home? I finally asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. The forensic team finished at your residence yesterday, Callahan replied. Technically, you could return now, although we recommend waiting until we confirm there are no security risks. I want to go today, I responded firmly. I need to be back in my own space. Gloria squeezed my hand supportively. I'll stay with you for the first few days. We can install additional security if needed. Rips nodded. We can arrange it, but there's another matter to address. She hesitated for a moment. Richard has requested another meeting with you. He'll be transferred to a minimum security prison pending trial, and he's asked to see you before that. My first instinct was to refuse. The wound of his betrayal was still raw, and I wasn't sure I had the emotional strength for another confrontation. Yet something within me, perhaps the mother who remembered the boy he once was, couldn't refuse that request. Tomorrow morning, if that's agreeable, Rips replied when I asked directly. After that, his visits will be very limited until legal proceedings conclude. I nodded slowly. I'll see him then. Underscore 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 underscore. That same afternoon, I stood on my porch with the key in my hand, hesitating before putting it in the lock. The facade looked the same, but I knew that inside strangers had invaded my space. They had planned my downfall in a place that should have meant safety. Take your time, Gloria said softly beside me. This is going to be difficult. I took a deep breath and turned the key. The familiar scent of my home, the gleam of wood, the old books, the faint trace of lavender from the sachets I placed in the closets, was now covered by foreign perfumes and cleaning products. There were traces of the Sterling's brief occupation in subtle details. The furniture was barely moved. My favorite orchid was gone from the sunroom. New curtains hung in the living room. In my study, Anani's antique desk had been turned toward the door instead of the window where he always worked, looking out at the garden. That minimal change hit me harder than I expected. They had erased our routines, our history. We can put everything back the way it was, Gloria assured me, seeing my face. Make it yours again. I nodded slowly, going through each room, noting changes and violations. In the master bedroom, my clothes were gone from the closet, replaced by Veronica's expensive suits. My simple jewelry box had been emptied. The pieces Anthony had given me over so many years of our life together were nowhere to be found. The FBI recovered most of your jewelry from the Sterling safe deposit box, Rips had told me earlier. They'll return them once they finish processing them as evidence. It was small comfort knowing that strangers had touched those intimate memories of my marriage, judging only their monetary, not sentimental value. In the kitchen, my collection of handwritten recipe cards, including those from my mother and grandmother, irreplaceable, had been discarded, replaced by shiny, modern cookbooks that clearly had never been used. That disdain felt personal, as if they had erased my family's history, a deeper wound than the financial theft. As I surveyed the damage, a strange calm settled over me. This house, these belongings, they had been violated, but they were still mine. I had survived. I had fought and reclaimed what was taken from me. The Sterling family had underestimated my resilience, my resources, and my determination. I'm staying, I decided, looking at Gloria. Tonight in my house. Are you sure? She asked with concern. Couldn't we start fresh tomorrow? I'm sure. I replied with renewed strength in my voice. I'm not going to let them keep me away from my own home for another night. As evening fell, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching twilight descend over the garden Anthony and I had planted together decades ago. The roses needed pruning. The hydrangeas were neglected, but the essence of what we had created was still there. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations with Richard, more legal procedures, the long process of rebuilding my home and my life. But tonight, I had reclaimed my space. It was a beginning. Underscore 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 underscore. As the investigation progressed, I faced a terrifying truth. Veronica and her parents had concocted a plan far more perverse than simple theft. Evidence showed they had deliberately hampered my medical recovery with the complicity of a corrupt nurse. They planned to institutionalize me in an isolated facility and had been stalking me for almost 2 years. Although Richard seemed oblivious to the darkest aspects of the conspiracy, the calculated cruelty of what they had prepared for me was too monstrous to assimilate. Standing in my violated home, seeing how they erased traces of my married life, I understood that a long road lay ahead, not only to recover my property, but also my sense of security. Tomorrow, I would have another confrontation with my son before he was transferred to a facility awaiting trial. A conversation I feared but could not avoid if I wanted to understand how our family had fallen apart so completely. Underscore 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 underscore. The visitation room at the detention center was brighter than I imagined, with fluorescent lights reflecting off pale yellow walls in a failed attempt to lend cheer. Richard sat at a small table dressed in a standard-issue uniform that hung loosely on him. He had lost weight since his arrest, his face drawn, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming," he said when I sat across from him. This time no lawyer was present. "It was your decision," they told me. "You wanted to see me?" I replied, keeping my voice calm. "Here I am." He nodded, lowering his gaze to his hands, which he gripped tightly on the table. "They told me about the nurse, what Veronica and her parents planned for you." "Yes," I said, adding nothing more. "I simply waited. I swear, Mom, I didn't know." His voice cracked slightly. "I knew they wanted your house, your money. That was bad enough, unforgivable, but I never imagined they would." He fell silent, unable to articulate the full horror of what they had plotted. "I believe you," I said simply, and he snapped his head up, surprised. "You believe me about that specific part?" "Yes, I've seen enough evidence to think you weren't aware of their plans to physically harm me or institutionalize me." I spoke in a measured, objective tone, but added, "You did know about their plans to take everything that was mine. You willingly participated in that theft." He flinched but didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why, Richard?" The question that had haunted me for weeks finally emerged. "You grew up with every advantage. Your father and I taught you integrity, respect for others. What happened to that boy?" Richard remained silent for a long time, as if gathering courage for what he had to confess. "I've asked myself the same question every night in my cell," he finally replied. "The easy answer is that I was weak. I was afraid of losing Veronica if I didn't do what she wanted. I was afraid of the financial consequences if her father exposed my involvement in earlier deceptions." "And the difficult answer?" "The difficult answer," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "is that at some point I started to believe I deserved more than I had earned, that it was justified to cheat if that's how I got what I wanted." His voice was barely a whisper. "I became someone I don't recognize, someone Dad would have been ashamed of." The mention of Anthony, who had been so proud of our son, who dreamed of the man he would become, pierced my chest with a sharp pain. Your father would be disappointed, I admitted without a doubt, and I am too. But I think what would disappoint him most wouldn't be that you made mistakes, but that you betrayed your own principles to cover them up. Richard nodded, accepting that truth without excuses. The prosecutors have offered a plea deal. 5 years, reduced to 3 with good behavior, in exchange for my full testimony against Veronica and her parents. Are you going to accept it? Yes, he replied without hesitation. It's more clemency than I deserve. We fell silent for a moment, the weight of the consequences hanging between us. My son would spend years in prison. The life he had known had vanished forever. The bright future Anthony and I had imagined for him had been reduced to this sterile visitation room lit by unforgiving fluorescent lights. I found something in the house yesterday, I said, changing the subject. At the bottom of your father's desk drawer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn envelope. It's a letter he wrote to you before he died. He asked me to give it to you when I thought you needed it most. I think that time is now. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he took the envelope, turning it over to see his name in Anani's unmistakable handwriting. I didn't know this existed, he whispered. During his last months he wrote several letters, I said. This was the last one. I watched him open it carefully as if the paper might crumble in his fingers. I remained silent as he read, watching emotions cross his face, pain, shame, and finally something akin to determination. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and pressed it against his chest for a moment before returning it to the envelope. Thank you for bringing this, he said, his voice firmer. I needed to hear his voice again, even if the circumstances are. He gestured vaguely at our surroundings. What will you do afterward? I asked. When you've served your sentence? The question seemed to surprise him. Perhaps he hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. Perhaps he didn't expect me to imagine a future for him beyond punishment. I don't know, he admitted. My career and my finances are over. Obviously my reputation, he shrugged. A gesture that spoke volumes about the ruin of his former life. You'll have to rebuild yourself, I told him. Not just practically but morally too. That's the hardest work. I know. He hesitated for a moment, then asked the question that weighed most heavily within him. Will you ever be able to forgive me, Mom? I thought carefully before answering, unwilling to offer easy phrases or false promises. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Richard. It's a process. Right now, I'm still processing the pain, the betrayal, the impact of discovering what you became. I looked him directly in the eyes. I don't know if complete forgiveness is possible, but I do know one thing. You are still my son. That biological fact doesn't change. How our relationship will be from now on will depend on the decisions you make from this moment forward. He nodded, accepting that partial answer with unexpected calm. It's fair. More than fair. Our time was almost up. A guard approached, ready to escort him back to his cell. As we stood to say goodbye, he asked one more thing. The house. Will you stay there after everything that happened? Yes, I replied firmly. It's my home. I won't let what they did force me to flee the life your father and I built. Good, he murmured softly. Dad would have wanted that. As I watched him walk away, shoulders held high despite everything, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. It wasn't healing. That would take much longer, but it was the beginning of understanding. My son had made terrible decisions. He had betrayed me in ways that might never be fully repaired. But beneath the man who participated in the sterling scheme, fragments of the boy I raised still remained. Underscore 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 underscore. Outside the detention center, Gloria was waiting for me in her car, a silent support I had learned to trust during these tough weeks. How did it go? She asked as I settled into the passenger seat. As well as could be expected, I replied, watching the autumn leaves swirl in the parking lot. He accepted a plea deal. 5 years, perhaps reduced to 3. And how do you feel about that? I reflected for a moment, allowing myself to fully examine my feelings. Sad, relieved, still angry, but less so than before. Most things are clear to me now about what happened and where we're going. Gloria nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. As we drove back to my true home, reclaimed and in the process of restoration, I thought about everything I had experienced in recent months. From the blow of betrayal to the fight for justice. From the horror of discovering what they had planned against me to reaching this moment of fragile resolution. The road ahead was still complicated. Legal proceedings against Veronica and her parents would drag on for months. Fully securing my assets and rebuilding my life would take time. My relationship with my son, if it could be salvaged, would require years of constant effort. But for the first time since waking from surgery and discovering my world had shattered, I felt genuine hope for the future. Not because the path would be easy, but because I had found a strength within myself I never imagined I possessed. As we turned onto my street, the setting sun bathed the facade of my house in a golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings amidst so many endings. Underscore 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 underscore. In the cold, harsh light of the detention center visitation room, I finally heard the truth from my son's lips. His confession of moral failure, of having strayed from the values his father and I had instilled in him. Although I saw him genuinely horrified by the physical harm Veronica and her parents had planned against me, he took full responsibility for stealing my assets, facing a plea deal that would send him to prison for years. I gave him his father's last gift, a letter Anthony wrote before he died, saved for the moment Richard needed it most. His question about forgiveness had no easy answer. All I could offer was the truth about the long and uncertain road ahead for both of us. Leaving the detention center, I felt an unexpected clarity. It wasn't healing yet, but it was the first step toward the new reality awaiting us both. With my house being restored and justice underway, I found myself looking forward instead of being anchored in the past, recognizing a strength I never knew I possessed. Underscore 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 underscore. That's the last one, Gloria said, placing a family portrait on the newly installed shelf in my living room. 6 months had passed since my encounter with Richard at the detention center. 6 months of patiently rebuilding my home, my finances, and my sense of security. It looks just like it should, I commented, surveying the living room. The furniture had returned to its place. The curtains were replaced with styles I liked, and the subtle traces of the Sterling's brief stay had been meticulously removed. Better than right, Gloria countered, pointing to the new security system panel by the door. It's safer now than ever. She was right. Everything I had been through had led to practical improvements. Reinforced locks, a comprehensive security system, new protocols for my financial accounts. The fragility that allowed the Sterlings to infiltrate my life had been identified and fortified against future threats. The roses are blooming again too, I added, looking out the window at my garden, where spring shoots were beginning to emerge. I had spent hours replanting and tending the flower beds abandoned during the Sterling's occupation, finding in it unexpected therapy and a reconnection with the earth. Gloria smiled, catching the metaphor in my words. If they're coming back with proper care and time, recovery is possible. underscore 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 underscore. The past few months had brought significant progress. Veronica and her parents faced an avalanche of federal charges: fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, with attempted homicide for the medical manipulation. The evidence against them, reinforced by Richard's detailed testimony, was overwhelming. To avoid a trial with lengthy sentences, they accepted plea bargains: 20 years for Raymond, 15 for Claudia, 18 for Veronica. The magnitude of their criminal network proved to be even larger than initially thought, with victims identified in 3 states. The nurse who had altered my medication received 8 years, her sentence reduced to 5 in exchange for testifying about other vulnerable patients the Sterlings had targeted. The investigation uncovered 2 previous cases of elderly homeowners who died under suspicious circumstances after becoming involved with Sterling investment properties, now opened as possible homicides. My neighborhood was spared from the predatory rezoning plan. With the Sterlings' operation exposed, the properties they had acquired were being returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. The community united, creating a support network for seniors to protect them from similar future scams. Underscore 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 underscore. Have you decided about the visit? Gloria asked, pulling me from my thoughts as she served 2 glasses of iced tea. The visit she referred to was Richard's latest request. Now, after 3 months serving time in a minimum security facility, he had asked if I would consider seeing him again. His letters, sent weekly since his incarceration began, had always respected my boundaries, assuming no forgiveness, but consistently showing his remorse and describing his attempts at rehabilitation. I think I'll go, I said, surprised by the certainty in my voice. Not next week. I have the garden club fundraiser, but perhaps the week after. Gloria nodded, her expression carefully neutral. You seem calmer about the idea than a month ago. Underscore 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 underscore. I dreamed of Anthony last night, I explained, and that memory brought me unexpected solace. We were on the porch swing talking just like old times. He told me something that stuck with me. Healing doesn't mean erasing the wound. It means finding purpose in the scar. That sounds like Anthony, Gloria commented with a soft smile. He always found wisdom in difficult times. I woke up thinking about Richard, I continued, and how some wounds never fully close, but perhaps they can still lead to something meaningful. Not returning to what was, but moving forward to something new. Underscore 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 underscore. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. On the screen of my new tablet connected to the security camera, I saw a delivery person holding a large floral arrangement. Expecting flowers? Gloria asked as she headed to the door. No, I replied, suddenly feeling an old weariness. Distrust didn't disappear easily despite the current security measures. Gloria checked the delivery person's credentials before accepting the bouquet. A beautiful arrangement of lilies and irises, my favorites. The card simply read, "Thinking of you on your birthday, your neighbor, Eleanor Jameson." I smiled, touched by the gesture. Eleanor Jameson had moved into the house across the street 3 months ago, a retired literature professor with quick wit and similar tastes. We had slowly forged a friendship, sharing gardening tips and reading recommendations. She had lost her husband around the same time I lost Anthony, which immediately created a bond of understanding between us. Underscore 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 underscore. What a lovely gesture, Gloria commented, admiring the arrangement. You're building a very solid community here. She was right. After the Sterling scandal, I had made a conscious decision to strengthen my connections instead of retreating into isolation. The neighborhood book club I had founded already met monthly in my living room. The senior community center, where I volunteered twice a week, had become a place of valuable friendships. The garden club welcomed me enthusiastically for my expertise with heirloom roses, even appointing me head of the annual exhibition. These authentic, freely chosen bonds had become my greatest defense against any future vulnerability. Underscore 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 underscore. I've been thinking about the foundation, I said as we settled onto the patio swing with our cups of tea. The Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation, I clarified, referring to the organization my husband had created before his passing to fund studies on the rare heart condition that ended his life. What about it? Gloria asked. I want to expand its mission, I explained. Add a division focused on elder protection, legal support, fraud prevention, education, and victim services. Gloria's eyes lit up with interest. Using your experience to help others in similar situations. Exactly. The Sterlings had dozens of victims before they targeted me. Most didn't have my resources or the knowledge to defend themselves. I want to change that reality for others. That's a wonderful idea, Gloria said warmly. Anthony would be proud. I think so too, I replied, looking out at the neighborhood where I had managed to rebuild my sense of home and security, finding purpose in the scar, as he used to say. Underscore 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 underscore. As afternoon slipped into evening, we remained in comfortable silence, watching neighbors return from work and children playing in nearby yards, the pulse of the community beating around us. The trauma of what I had lived through would never entirely disappear. There would always be moments of intense alertness, echoes of betrayal that would suddenly surface. But those scars no longer defined my daily existence. They had become a source of wisdom, deeper empathy, and renewed purpose. Later, when Gloria left, I sat at Anani's desk, now correctly placed in front of the garden window, and began to outline the structure of the foundation's new division. As I worked, I felt that everything made sense, as if a cycle was closing. The Sterlings had chosen me because they saw a fragile, easily exploited elderly widow. The foundation would transform that painful experience into protection for many others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A meeting with the foundation board, preparations for my future visit to Richard, the restoration of the garden that had been neglected during my absence. But for the first time in many months, I looked forward to these challenges with true enthusiasm, not just determination. Underscore 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 underscore. My phone rang, interrupting my work. It was Eleanor, the neighbor from across the street, calling to make sure the flowers had arrived well, and to invite me to a chamber music concert next weekend. As we talked, I understood how much my life had changed in the 6 months since I reclaimed my house. The betrayal had broken something essential in me, my basic trust in family, in the protection familiar spaces are supposed to offer. But from that rupture, new strengths had emerged, new connections, a different purpose that perhaps never would have been born otherwise. Finding purpose in the scar, I murmured to myself as I hung up. Anani's wisdom resonated in my mind, not erasing the wound, but allowing it to transform into something meaningful, into something that with time could become a form of beauty. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months after confronting Richard, I find myself in a phase of unexpected renewal. As my house is restored and the garden blooms again, I receive news that Veronica and her parents have accepted lengthy prison sentences. Their extensive criminal network has finally been dismantled. The neighborhood they targeted has united in mutual defense, while I have forged new friendships and community ties that enrich my daily life. When Richard requests another visit at the minimum security prison, I decide, inspired by a dream with Anthony, that I am ready to take that step, not with the intention of erasing what happened, but of finding meaning in the painful experience. That purpose takes concrete form in my plan to expand the Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation to include elder protection services, transforming my personal trauma into a shield for others who might become victims. As I settle into this new chapter, I realize that although the betrayal broke something essential within me, that rupture opened space for unexpected growth, new connections, and a deeper wisdom about what truly matters. In the time I have left, this story reminds us that the wicked will sooner or later be unmasked and punished, while those who maintain an upright heart will find the justice and peace they deserve.